Hello and welcome to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Tyler, and man, opening day is around the corner. I know we've got some games going on now in Tokyo between the Cubs and the Dodgers, but it doesn't truly feel like the baseball season until the games are at 1 in the afternoon, 4 in the afternoon, 7 in the evening. None of this 6 a.m. stuff that it's great to wake up in the morning with my toddler and be able to watch something interesting other than Bluey or Paw Patrol, although those are interesting in their own right. Still, I don't feel like baseball season has truly arrived until the games are happening on North American turf. So we're excited about that in a couple of weeks. On today's episode, we're going to continue our preview series. We got just two of these left. Today we're going to do third base, and on Friday, maybe Saturday morning, I'll be previewing the outfielders, kind of throwing all of them into one jumble because I think they do uniquely kind of fit that way. There's no perfectly defined left field, center field, right field on this team. We'll talk about that later this week. Today, it's going to be all about the third baseman. Now, before we get to that, a little bit of housekeeping. Remember that we are part of the Believe Podcast Network. That's BLEAV.com. Support us, support the other shows on the platform. We'd really appreciate it. And of course, we do have a sponsor for this podcast, and that sponsor is BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for betting on all the madness this month. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion. They have the largest selection of odds on everything from college basketball to a $200,000 bracket contest. BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every Cinderella story to every hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Thanks to BetOnline for supporting this episode of the Warehouse Podcast. All right, let's talk about the meat and potatoes here, which is the third base position. And I think the best way to start here is always to talk about what happened in 2024 to kind of lay a base here. So what I'm doing is looking at Fangraphs. They've got, you can go look at their leaders section. You can sort by position group, and I've got it sorted by third base position group for the 2024 season. And what I'm looking at here is just overall value of the position groups. And the Orioles here clock in at 10th in all of baseball at 3.3 wins above replacement, just below the San Diego Padres, who have familiar friend Manny Machado leading the way for them at that position, and above the Atlanta Braves, who have what's his name? Riley. Oh God. Embarrassing to try and recall the name and then not remember what the person's name is. Austin Riley, who is very good and makes a lot of money now over there. So not a bad batch to be included in. And of course, the caveat being injuries. And, Austin Riley had injuries, Manny Machado had injuries last year, and the Orioles also were hit by their own injuries, including to the sort of number one guy there at the position for them going into 2025, which was Jordan Westburg. Jordan Westburg, of course, all-star last year, wasn't just a third baseman early in the season, played third, played second when second base was kind of an influx position for the Orioles. Early on they had Tony Kemp there, they had Jorge Mateo there, they brought Jackson Holliday up. That didn't go very well. They sent him back down. I think they still wanted some pop in the lineup, especially against right-handed pitching. So Westbrook played a lot of second base. Ramon Urias filled in at third base. All that to say that Westbrook ended up making the All-Star team. In his first full season, which is really exciting. And if you look at his first half stats, they are very good. In 89 games in the first half, he hit 271 to the 318 on base and a 496 slug for an 814 OPS. Very good numbers, deserving of an all-star nod. Awesome to see him make the game there. He comes back from the all-star break. A few games later is the trade deadline, or a few days later rather is the trade deadline, and we know what happens there. On the day of the trade deadline, or maybe the day after, breaks his hand on a pitch inside, misses most of the second half of the season. Obviously, played a few games between the All-Star break and that point, and then came back at the very end of the season and just wasn't really the same player. The production wasn't there. He batted 233 with a 282 on base and a 411 slug. Only 3 home runs after the All-Star break in 18 games, had 15 home runs in 89 games before the break. It was sort of just the Orioles grasping at straws there towards the end of the season. They were hoping somebody could come in and give him a jolt offensively. Westberg wasn't really the guy to do that. In September specifically, he only played in 6 games, batted 192 with a 222 on base and a 231 slug. So really, if you want to look at like the splits between pre-break and post-break, it's anything before September was pre-break and everything after September was after break. So he didn't get a lot of time to ramp up. The Orioles offense never really recovered, and just a poor ending to the season, which was a really promising one for Jordan Westburg. Who knows what he could have done in August and early September had that not happened, but we didn't get to see it. Now, Positively is that Ramon Urias jumped in and really filled in well for the Orioles last year. He played a lot of third base, like I said, early in the season when second base was in flux, and then later in the season when second base was a little bit more, yeah, a little bit more sorted out. Not really; it was still a bit of a mess. But he played a lot of third base because Jordan Westburg was out with the hand injury in most of the second half of the season and did really well in 86 games last year. Ramon Urias had a 244 batting average, 318 on base, and a 421 slug at the position for a 114 WRC plus. I think, WRC, that's 14% above the league average at the position. Pretty good stuff there. Of course, then he had injury stuff at the very end of the year as well. He got back at the same time as Westbrook, because his injury wasn't quite as significant. And then Emmanuel Rivera filled in during that period, and he was pretty good as well. Kind of one of the only guys on the team that was really hitting the ball at the very end of the season. And he's back with the organization right now in spring training. Is he going to make the team on opening day? Probably not, unless there's an injury to somebody that we're talking about today, which doesn't seem like it. So that was kind of the lay of the land for 2024. A lot of promise, interrupted by a lot of injuries. And the other element of third base that we should talk about for 2024, because it does impact 2025, is that Kobe Mayo did come up for a brief period of time and play some third base for the Orioles. Of course, a top prospect for the team. I think some of his shine has worn off. Still a top, like 30 prospect, but not sort of that bona fide, no doubt about it, number one guy anymore. Samuel Basallo has passed him in the Orioles rankings. He's fallen down a little bit in the overall rankings, but still obviously a really good prospect. But Mayo came up last year. Things didn't go great for him offensively. Only batted 103 with a 212 on base and a 103 slugging percentage at third base. I think he was actually a little bit worse than that overall. Struck out nearly 40% of the time. Just looked really overmatched. And for him, that's a big problem for anybody. Those numbers aren't good enough for anybody. But he's really an offensive first guy. We know he's got strong arm, powerful bat, strikes out a good amount, and fielding is not his forte. So if you're not going to hit, there's really a problem there. But again, his first taste of the majors, and we've seen this movie before with Orioles prospects coming up struggling. It doesn't really indicate that they're going to be, terrible down the line. We've seen Kowser have struggles, Rutschman have struggles. Holiday had struggles last year. Hopefully he bounces back this year. So there's enough evidence there to suggest that Mayo's not a sunken cost or anything. But we'll talk about him in just a minute in terms of how he plays into the 2025 picture there. But that was 2024 for the position group. Like I said, on totals, on summary, despite injuries to basically their top two guys in Westburg and Urias, and then a struggling debut for Mayo. So things not going perfectly well. They were still the 10th best group of third basemen in Major League Baseball. Now going into 2025, really nothing has changed there. The Orioles have all of those guys back. All of those guys are healthy. If they can stay healthy, you'd think that this position group is even better if you get a full season out of Jordan Westburg and he can stay at third base, which is his, better defensive position than second base. He just fits it a little bit better. Maybe the power is not quite what you want for the position. Maybe you want just a skosh more. Maybe he does that in his second full season. But you would think that they would jump up a little bit at the position in 2025. So speaking of 2025, let's look at projections for the position in 2025. Of course, these are not all possible to happen at the same time. If you're looking at my screen right now on YouTube, which if you aren't, please subscribe to the podcast there. You can see these projections here. Has everybody playing over 100 games, including Westburg, Mayo, and Urias, plus Livan Soto, Emmanuel Rivera, and Luis Vasquez. That's not going to happen for the Baltimore Orioles. Maybe they go somewhere else and play over 100 games, but it's not going to happen for the Orioles. But this is kind of just gives you an idea of sort of the abilities that Fangraphs sort of puts out for these guys. So they have Westburg playing 123 games at the position at a 3.6 WAR. Kobe Mayo 123 games, 2.5 WAR. Ramon Urias 107 games, 1.8 WAR. Westburg at a 116 WRC plus, Mayo at a 111 WRC plus, and Urias at a 109 WRC plus. As far as home runs, it's Westburg 17, Mayo 19, Urias 10. So another reason why I say not all of this is going to happen is because of some news that came out earlier this week, which is that Kobe Mayo is not going to make the opening day roster for the Baltimore Orioles. I don't think this is much of a surprise for anybody, probably Mayo included. Going into spring training, there was no obvious fit for him on the roster, period, let alone at third base. Westburg's healthy. His other position is first base. We've got the Ryans over there, which Eli covered earlier this week. I think long term, Westburg should be here if he's healthy. He's produced. He plays good defense. He'll be the third baseman. I don't see how you can really make any sort of justification for why Mayo should be there over him, especially from a defensive perspective. If Westberg is, being a 10 to 15% above average league hitter and playing above average defense, that's your third baseman. You find somewhere else for Mayo. First base, I think there could be some opportunities there. I think this is a contract year for Ryan O'Hearn. Ryan Mountcastle is going to get an opportunity this year with the Walls brought back in left field to show if he's maybe got another level to his game. He's sort of become kind of the same type of player year after year, which is a similar player to Jordan Westburg, but at first base and with about the same power output. And I think at first base, you need just a little bit more there. So if Mayo can be that guy, I think Mayo could be the Orioles' answer at first base long term. And it'll be interesting to see what the Orioles do with him as they send him back down to AAA. We saw in the spring this year, he played about even innings between first and third base in the spring. My guess is he's going to go to AAA and maybe continue that 50-50 split. And as the season goes on, potentially inch more and more towards first base where they can hide his glove a little bit. Yes, you waste his arm, but then you can get the bat in the lineup at some point. And if he can prove he can handle the position and then come up at some point this season and prove he can hit major league pitching, then I think that allows the Orioles to kind of say goodbye to Ryan O'Hearn, on his contract year. He can walk and potentially move Ryan Mountcastle for something in the offseason. I kind of advocated for that this offseason when I felt like the Orioles could have used another pitcher in the bullpen. They opted to keep him and sign Andrew Kittredge, and Kittredge's hurt now. Couldn't have foreseen that. But I think the Orioles seemed to agree that they needed another arm in the bullpen, but they felt like Mountcastle was more valuable to keep at first base rather than trade for a pitcher who might have been more affordable and younger than Kittredge. So we'll see if that holds true going into 2026. But that's kind of where Mayo stands right now. So will he play third base for the Orioles in 2025? I would guess yes, he will. But I don't think that there's much justification for him to come up and be an everyday third baseman ahead of certainly not Jordan Westburg and potentially not even Ramon Urias if you're worried about the defense. I think they'll try to find somewhere else for him to get some at bats. And that could even be the DH spot, which the Orioles don't exactly have, locked down right now. I think you could see a lot of guys sort of shuffle through that, and that's, I think, intentional from the Orioles. They didn't want an Anthony Santander back unless it was for a good price. We learned that earlier or a couple weeks ago when Santander said that the Orioles made an offer to him, but it really wasn't even close to some of the other offers he got. I think the Orioles don't want the DH spot weighed down by any one person. Santander played a lot of right field, but the defensive issues were pretty evident there. So they've kind of purposefully left the DH spot in flux that, Kjerstad can go there, Rutschman can go there on a day off, one of the Ryans can go there. Tyler O'Neill could get a day off there. It's sort of a half day off to keep him fresh because he's had injury stuff. And I think Kobe Mayo could potentially fit in there, especially if injuries pile up throughout the season. That could be where he fits. All that big wind up to say that third base ultimately comes down to Jordan Westburg, his health, and his production. If you look at his baseball savant last year, it's good stuff. It's a lot of red, and of course, this is an elementary sort of reading of his performance. But a lot of red on baseball savant tends to be good. Blue is bad, and you can see a lot of red in his offensive performance. Of course, we know that he came back from injury and his numbers were not as good, but it's a very small sample. It's after an injury, probably came back a little soon just to try and help the team do something. And just didn't really work, didn't spark anything. Sprint speed's sort of an underrated element of his game. I'll be interested to see if the Orioles tell him to run any more this season. As we know, they've basically told Jackson Holliday they want him to run a little bit more, be more aggressive, use your speed, force the defense to make mistakes, things like that. It'll be interesting to see if they tell Jordan Westburg, who has similar speed to Jordan Westburg similar speed to Jackson Holliday at the top end. Hey, Jordan, go get a couple stolen bases. Hey, try to take an extra bag. Like we're not, because I think what's important to understand with this team is I think some guys will take leaps forward in a power perspective. I think Rutschman will be better on the power side of things after being really bad in the second half. I think Jackson Holliday has to be better than he was last year. I think, a lot of guys can take steps forward, but they're losing Anthony Santander, who was among the league leaders in home runs last year. I don't know they're going to replace that. So to replace the run production overall, you might have to make the defense sweat a little bit, and that means taking the extra bag here and there, We know Gunnar Henderson will do that. We know Cedric Mullins will do that. Seems like Jackson Holliday is going to start to do that. I think Jordan Westburg is another candidate to really push the envelope there. So I'll be interested to see that and how that kind of impacts his overall value. Again, on Baseball Savant, they give him a base runner run value of 1, which is above average. 0 is average, I believe. And there's a lot of guys that are poor base runners that are negative. So he's already a plus base runner. I don't think they want to take that away, but hey, Jordan, go get that extra bag here or there. Let's see if he makes that happen. And then on the defensive side, I do want to look at his fielding because it is a mixed bag there. If you look at just his outs above average, it's -5, which is not good. It's in the 12th percentile. It's not a good number for him. But then if you scroll down and look at it by position and the split there, he had a -2 at shortstop, a -8 at second base, and a 5 outs above average at third base. If he had 5 outs above average for the entire season, he'd be one of the best fielding third basemen in baseball. And I think that's why, we've seen Gunnar Henderson's had injury stuff this spring training. They've been moving Jackson Holliday over there. They've been putting Westburg over there a little bit, but I think in general they want Westburg at third base. That's his position. He's good at coming in on the ball. He doesn't so much have the lateral stuff. The arm is fine. It's not spectacular. So they want him to be able to utilize his skills the best possible way, and third base is the place for him to do that. So that's an important caveat there. While his numbers overall look bad defensively last year, it's because he was in positions that were not, maximizing his skill set. So keep him at third base. If there are needs other places, allow the other guys to fill in there because it's just not really a net gain for the Orioles there. So yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to say there. It's all the big storylines are if Westbrook stays healthy and basically repeats what he did for most of the season last year, he's probably an all-star again, maybe on the outside of that, but in general, still a well above average third baseman. Should put the Orioles position group at third base into the top 10 again. And if Westbrook's healthy, it allows Ramon Urias to fill in other places where he might be needed more. He might be needed more at second base, where Jackson Holliday is figuring to not play against left-handed starters all the time. Of course, Jorge Mateo helped there as well. Ramon Urias can fill in at first base occasionally if there's an injury. And of course, give Westbrook a day off here and there. And I think that's honestly the best use of Ramon Urias. However, what I will say is production wise for Ramon Urias, he seems to perform the best when he's in the lineup every day or two, like not going in once or twice a week. So that's the one negative there. But still, it's valuable to have a guy that is capable of coming off the bench and putting up, you know, reasonable numbers. But that's just sort of the place he exists in for the Orioles is that he's not quite as good as their first string guys. So he has to sort of um, fit in where he can. So it will be interesting to see if, Gunnar Henderson for whatever reason doesn't quite make it back for opening day. Maybe Holiday becomes the shortstop most days, and that means Urias plays second base. Something there. And injuries do happen, and I think the Orioles will be cognizant of giving guys days off throughout the season because they had so many little injuries. So let's give Ramon a couple more days at third base. Let's give Westberg more days off, and so on and so forth to keep guys fresh and to keep guys that sit more engaged with what's going on in the field. I think that's an important aspect of it too. So that's kind of the big thing there. And then Kobe Mayo is sort of the X factor that it's no surprise that he didn't make the opening day roster. I think he still have an impact on the position group in some way, shape, and form. I think he'll certainly have an impact on the Orioles in 2025. But more and more, the signs seem to point to Kobe Mayo not necessarily being viewed as a third baseman for the Orioles, at least not an everyday third baseman. So we'll see how he kind of adapts to that if the position change goes on and what the Orioles do. So that's certainly an element of minor league box score scouting that you can do and inform you of what the Orioles are thinking for the remainder of 2025. Because the other option with Mayo is, if he's not really a fit for this team, is that he becomes the key in a trade for, I think the one that people are all talking about is Sandy Alcantara from the Marlins as being a guy that is somewhat available. The Marlins are a bad team. He's got a good contract. Yes, he's coming off Tommy John, so maybe they want to see something there. But again, and you're sending him to the National League. You don't have to deal with him too much. And you know the Marlins already. The Marlins know you. You've made deals with them. There was the Kyle Stowers, Connor Norby trade last year that got the Orioles Trevor Rogers. So there's a familiarity there. There is a NL AL thing where you don't have to worry about the guy as much coming back to haunt you. And there's a match between pitchers and hitters. The Marlins need talent, they need hitters, and the Orioles could provide that. So I think that's like the thing hanging out there as the summer goes on. If it feels like Mayo's just not going to fit, that's the guy to go get. But it is certainly a different situation than the Joey Ortiz for Corbin Burns deal, where Ortiz was really squeezed out, where they had three or four shortstops between um, Westburg, Henderson, and Holiday, and then Ortiz. It was like, what are we going to do here? We can't play them all, and they're all the same age or the same step in their development. And the Brewers were looking to get rid of a pitcher with 1 year left. There probably aren't as many suitors there. Whereas with Sandy Alcantara, you could have teams that are both competing this year and not competing this year that want Sandy Alcantara because they could think they're going to compete in 2026 and 2027. Because before I get off of this, I'll just look at Sandy Alcantara's um, uh, stats, or his contract rather, and of course I can't type it up very fast. Can't do it on the fly there. But Sandy Alcantara is 29 years old, and if I look at his contract, he is making $17.3 million this year, $17.3 million next year, and then a team option for $21 million that, if he's producing like he did in 2022 when he was a Cy Young winner with a 2.28 ERA, that's an easy contract to pick up. Struggled a little bit in 2023 and then had the Tommy John last year, so you want to see how he bounces back. But in general, that feels like a possible match there for the Orioles where they could put Kobe Mayo plus some other things to Miami for Sandy Alcantara, an ace pitcher with years of team control. That sounds like right up Mike Elias's alley. So we'll see what comes of that. But that's about all I got for the third base review. Like I said, not too complicated here. If Westberg's healthy, the Orioles' third base situation is going to be good. If he's not, they've got some decent backup plans that will make them, I think, competent at the position. And also injuries will give Kobe Mayo another shot that I know after getting demoted this week, he was pretty bummed out, as you'd expect him to be. So it'll be interesting there. But that's all I've got for this episode. Like I said, coming up this week, at the end of this week, I will have a episode on the outfield preview. And then sometime over the weekend and then released early next week, I believe Jesse and Eli and maybe myself, my weekend's a little bit packed right now. They're going to do more of an overall preview and prediction for the 2025 season because it's coming up. Opening day is next week. So those might be the only two episodes we get out before opening day. And then we will start to have recaps of every series for the rest of the season. Basically 2 episodes a week, 1 episode after every series, plus any big breaking news throughout the year we'll talk about. So if you're not subscribed to the podcast, please do it now on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube, where we upload all of these videos. You can see our faces, or at least my face. I don't know if Eli and Jesse always, or no, you can see their faces too. They just don't always share their screens. So go over to YouTube and subscribe there. It's free everywhere. Just give us a subscribe. It helps us reach more people, and give us a thumbs up, and leave a comment down below on this episode. Tell me what you think about the Orioles third base situation. Do you think Kobe Mayo fits into it long term, or would you rather trade him for somebody like a Sandy Alcantara or something else? Leave us a comment and let us know. But that's all I got. Again, thanks to Believe, and thanks to Bet Online for supporting this show, and we will talk to you next time. See ya.